What if I told you a band could outsell Led Zeppelin in Europe, pack Soviet stadiums for 10 nights under armed guards, and still be called worthless by critics? It sounds impossible, but it happened. And the story behind it is even more unbelievable, because this band didn't just rise. They were rejected, pushed to the edge, and nearly destroyed by the same success that made them famous. London, late 1960s. Rock music was everywhere, but it was starting to sound the same. Blues covers dominated the scene. Bands copied each other, chasing what already worked. If you wanted to break through, you had two choices: follow the formula or risk everything trying something new. Mick Box chose the risk. He was a working-class kid from Walthamstow, balancing football and guitar, forming a band called the Stalkers in 1967. It wasn't glamorous. Small gigs, small pay, and almost no recognition. But it was a start. Then came the moment that changed everything. The band needed a singer. Their drummer suggested his cousin, David Garrick. The audition didn't happen in a studio. It happened in a pub, after a few drinks, like countless others that led nowhere. But this one was different. Garrick walked in, sang, and instantly stood out. He didn't just have a strong voice. He had presence, drama, control. He sounded bigger than the rooms they were playing in. He took the name David Byron, and from that moment, the band changed. The chemistry between Byron and Mick Box was immediate. Guitar and voice locked together in a way that felt unique. They weren't trying to copy American blues. They were chasing something heavier, something layered, something almost theatrical. But ambition isn't enough. So in 1969, they rebuilt the band under a new name, Spice. They added bassist Paul Newton and drummer Alex Napier, who famously got the job after lying about being single because the band didn't want distractions. It sounds extreme, but they were serious. Music came first, everything else came after. They played constantly, clubs, small venues, anywhere that would take them, night after night, building a following one performance at a time. And slowly, people started paying attention. But something still wasn't right. They had energy, they had talent, but they didn't yet have that defining sound that separates good bands from unforgettable ones. Then everything shifted again. Manager Jerry Braun stepped in. He saw potential others missed. A band that didn't fit the mold, which meant they could either fail completely or stand out in a way nobody could ignore. He signed them and pushed them toward a record deal. But here's where it gets interesting, because the decision that would define their entire sound hadn't happened yet. And when it did, it wouldn't just change the band. It would create something the music world wasn't ready for. The change came quietly. No big announcement, no dramatic moment, just one decision that would reshape everything. They needed a keyboard player. At the time, most hard rock bands didn't rely heavily on keyboards. Guitars ruled, drums hit hard, bass held it together. Keyboards were optional. But this band didn't want optional. They wanted depth. So they brought in Ken Hensley, and that changed everything. Hensley wasn't just a keyboard player, he was a songwriter, a multi-instrumentalist, and more importantly, he understood structure. He knew how to build songs that moved, that shifted, that felt bigger than the sum of their parts. He introduced the Hammond organ and the mellotron into their sound. If you've never heard those instruments, imagine something between a church organ and a wall of sound. Thick, layered, and powerful. Suddenly, the band wasn't just heavy, they were cinematic. Around this time, another decision came in, one that seemed small, but would stick forever. It was 1970, and the name Spice wasn't cutting through. It sounded generic, forgettable. Manager Jerry Braun had an idea. Charles Dickens was everywhere that year, marking 100 years since his death. So Braun suggested a name from one of his characters, Uriah Heep, a manipulative, sly character from David Copperfield. Not exactly heroic, not exactly cool, but unforgettable. The band hesitated, then accepted. And just like that, they had a name people wouldn't forget. But wait, this next part almost derailed everything. Because when they entered the studio to record their first album, they had no idea what they were doing. Recording wasn't like playing live. It was controlled, technical, and unfamiliar. Microphones were placed in strange positions. Sounds came out different. What felt powerful on stage sometimes sounded flat on tape. Mick Box later admitted they were confused half the time, but they kept going. The result was their debut album, Very Heavy, Very Humble, released in 1970. And right from the start, it made a statement. The track Gypsy hit like nothing else at the time. Heavy guitar riffs, layered vocals, swirling organ.
Little girl, she means all the world.
It was aggressive but also melodic, complex but still catchy. It didn't sound like blues. It didn't sound like anything else. And that was the problem, because critics hated it, especially in the United States. One review became infamous. A writer for Rolling Stone didn't just dislike the album. She said she would harm herself if the band ever succeeded. It was harsh, personal, completely dismissive. And here's where it gets wild. The fans didn't care. While critics attacked them, audiences connected with the music, the power, the energy, the uniqueness. In Europe, the album started gaining traction. Slowly at first, then faster. Uriah Heep wasn't becoming a critics band. They were becoming something else entirely, a people's band. And that meant something much bigger was coming. Because when a band grows without the support of critics, they build something stronger. But it also means there's no safety net when things start to fall apart. Success didn't come slowly after that. It exploded. By 1971, Uriah Heep wasn't just releasing music, they were flooding the market. 2 full albums in a single year. That pace sounds insane today, but back then, it was how you stayed relevant. The first was Salisbury, and it showed just how far they were willing to go. The title track stretched past 16 minutes and included a full orchestra, not a small one, a full 24-piece arrangement layered into a rock song. At a time when most bands were still working with simple structures, this was bold, maybe too bold. But then something unexpected happened. The song that truly took off from that album wasn't the massive orchestral piece. It was something much simpler. Lady in Black. No heavy riffs, no huge production. Just a steady rhythm, acoustic feel, and a haunting melody. It didn't sound like their other work, but it connected, especially in Germany. And when it connected, it really connected. The song stayed on the charts for years, not weeks, years. It sold millions over time and became one of their most recognizable tracks. But what if I told you the band didn't even expect it to be the hit? That's how unpredictable their rise was. Then came the second album that year, Look at Yourself. And this one hit differently. The title track, Look at Yourself, captured everything they had been building toward. Heavy guitar, driving rhythm, layers of organ, and David Byron's voice cutting through it all with power and control. It was confident, focused, and it worked. The album went gold in multiple countries. Suddenly, Uriah Heep wasn't just gaining attention, they were becoming a major force in rock. But here's the part people don't always see. While the success was growing, so was the pressure. They were touring almost 300 days a year. Think about that. Almost every day, a new city, a new stage, a new crowd. It sounds exciting, but it wears you down. Fast. Sleep becomes irregular. Relationships fade. Everything outside the band starts to disappear. And inside the band, tensions begin to build. But at this point, none of that was visible. From the outside, everything looked perfect. And then came the peak. Between 1972 and 1974, they released 3 albums that defined their entire legacy. Demons and Wizards, The Magician's Birthday, and Sweet Freedom. 3 albums in just a few years, each pushing their sound further, each growing their audience bigger. Demons and Wizards was the turning point. It featured Easy Livin', the song that would become their biggest hit. Short, sharp, and powerful. It broke into the top 40 in the United States and became a staple on radio. For many listeners, this was their introduction to the band, and it was unforgettable. But here's where it gets interesting. Because while the band was reaching new heights, the foundation underneath them was starting to crack. And those cracks were about to turn into something much worse. At their peak, everything looked unstoppable. Sold-out shows, gold records, a sound that stood out in a crowded scene. But behind the scenes, things were already slipping. And here's where it gets wild. The same pressure that pushed them to success was now pulling them apart. The touring never stopped. Nearly 300 days a year on the road. That kind of schedule doesn't just test a band, it breaks people. Lineups started changing constantly. Drummers came and went so often, it almost became a joke. Each one brought a different style, a different feel, and just as quickly, they were gone. That instability made it harder to stay consistent, even as their popularity grew. Then came bassist Gary Thain. He joined in 1972 and brought something new, a melodic style that gave their rhythm section more depth. On stage, it worked. In the studio, it worked. But off stage, things were different. Thain was struggling with drug use. At first, it was manageable. Then it wasn't. And in rock music at the time, this wasn't unusual. But that didn't make it less dangerous. Meanwhile, David Byron was dealing with his own issues: alcohol. What started as post-show drinking slowly became routine, then dependency. His performances became unpredictable. Some nights he was incredible, other nights not even close. And the band felt it, because when your lead singer is inconsistent, everything suffers. But what if I told you they kept going anyway? They kept recording, kept touring, kept pushing forward like nothing was wrong, because stopping wasn't an option. The label wanted more albums, the fans wanted more shows, and the band, despite everything, still believed they could hold it together. But the world around them was changing, fast. By the mid-1970s, a new movement was rising: punk. It rejected everything Uriah Heep stood for: complex songs, long tracks, layered production. Punk was simple, raw, aggressive, and critics loved it. Suddenly, the same critics who had always doubted them had a new favorite, and Uriah Heep found themselves on the wrong side of the shift. But wait, this next part changes everything. Because the real collapse didn't come from critics. It came from inside the band. In 1975, during a show in Dallas, Gary Thain suffered a severe electric shock on stage. Faulty equipment sent a surge through his body. It nearly killed him. He survived, but not really. The damage, combined with his drug use, made it impossible to continue. By the end of the year, he was out of the band. And then, just months later, the worst happened. Gary Thain was found dead in his apartment. He was 27 years old. Another name added to a growing list of musicians lost too early. And the band didn't have time to process it, because another decision was coming, one that would change everything. Losing Gary Thain was devastating, but what came next would define the band's future even more, because now the focus shifted to the frontman. David Byron was no longer the same performer he had been just a few years earlier. The voice was still there, but it wasn't consistent. The energy was unpredictable. Some nights he delivered, other nights he couldn't, and the band knew it. They had a choice: keep going as they were and risk everything falling apart on stage, or make the hardest decision possible. They chose the second option. In 1976, at the height of their fame, they fired their own lead singer. Let that sink in. The voice that helped build the band, gone. It wasn't just a lineup change, it was a gamble. Because replacing a singer like Byron isn't easy. Fans associate the voice with the identity. Change that, and you risk losing everything. But what if I told you the damage had already been done? Because Byron didn't recover. He tried to launch a solo career. The talent was still there, but the momentum wasn't. Without the band, the structure, and the audience he once had, things never reached the same level. His health declined. The years of alcohol abuse caught up with him. And in February 1985, David Byron died at just 38 years old. The man who once stood at the center of one of rock's most powerful bands was gone. And here's the part that hits hardest. He died with very little money. For someone who had helped sell millions of records, that's hard to imagine. But the music industry doesn't always reward people the way you think it does. Meanwhile, the band carried on. New singers came in, albums were released, tours continued. But something was different. The momentum was fading. The late 1970s and early 80s were brutal for bands like Uriah Heep. Disco took over the charts. Then new wave followed. The sound that once felt massive now felt outdated to mainstream audiences. Crowds got smaller, sales dropped. The band that once filled arenas was now playing much smaller venues, and yet they didn't stop. That's what makes this story different. because most bands would have ended there. But Uriah Heep didn't. They kept going through lineup changes, shifting trends, and fading attention. And then, something unexpected happened. In 1986, the band found stability again. A new vocalist, Bernie Shaw, joined. Along with keyboardist Phil Lanzon, they formed a lineup that would last for decades. For the first time in years, things weren't falling apart. And just when it seemed like their biggest days were behind them, history came calling. Just when it seemed like their story was fading out, something unbelievable happened. In 1987, Uriah Heep received an invitation that no one expected: the Soviet Union. At the time, this wasn't normal. Western rock bands didn't just perform there. The political tension, the restrictions, the control, it made events like this almost impossible. But things were changing. Under new policies, the Soviet government began opening its doors, just slightly, to Western culture. And somehow, Uriah Heep was chosen. Think about that. A band American critics had dismissed for years was now being invited to make history. They arrived in Moscow to something they couldn't have predicted: massive crowds. Not just curious listeners, but passionate fans who had waited years to experience this music live. They performed 10 consecutive nights at the Olympic Stadium. 10 nights. A total of around 180,000 people attended, and the atmosphere was unlike anything they had seen before. There were hundreds of soldiers surrounding the venue, many holding rifles. Security was tight, controlled, and intense. But inside the stadium, it was something else entirely: energy, excitement, release. For many in the audience, this wasn't just a concert, it was a moment of freedom. Music breaking through barriers that politics had built for decades. And here's where it gets wild. Those shows helped open the door for other Western bands to follow. Acts like Metallica and Scorpions would later perform in similar spaces. Uriah Heep didn't just survive, they became part of history. But even then, the losses didn't stop. Over the years, key members passed away. Drummer Lee Kerslake, keyboardist Ken Hensley. The people who built the sound were slowly gone. And yet, one person remained: Mick Box, the last original member, still performing, still carrying the name forward decades later. But what if I told you their legacy goes even further than concerts and records? In Bulgaria, something unusual happens every year. On the first day of July, thousands of people gather to watch the sunrise, and they sing one song, July Morning. What started as a track released in 1971
At the sound of the first bird singing
became something much bigger, a symbol of freedom, hope, and new beginnings. For years, even under strict regimes, people kept the tradition alive, quietly at first, then openly. A rock song written by working-class musicians in England became an anthem in another country entirely. You can't plan that. You can't predict it. That's the kind of impact that goes beyond charts and sales. And speaking of sales, the band has moved over 30 million records worldwide. Despite critics, despite setbacks, despite everything. So what is the real story here? It's not just rise and fall, it's persistence. Uriah Heep built their success without critical approval. They lost key members, faced constant change, and watched the industry move on without them. But they didn't disappear. From small clubs in London to massive shows in Moscow, from harsh reviews to lasting influence, they proved something simple. Sometimes, the bands that get written off are the ones that last the longest.